What happens when power-tripping cops target a quiet black woman walking her dog, only to realize too late that she is a Delta Force operative trained for war. They see an easy stop, an ordinary civilian, but what they fail to see is the discipline, the precision, and the storm waiting beneath her calm exterior. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The neighborhood of Ashford Hills carried the kind of stillness that only settled over places where routine had long replaced curiosity. Tree-lined sidewalks stretched in neat rows, trimmed hedges framing brick homes that all seemed to agree on silence as an unspoken rule. It was late afternoon, the sun leaning low enough to cast long golden streaks across the pavement, softening every edge it touched. Danielle Carter moved through that quiet like she belonged to it, her steps measured, unhurried, the leash in her hand hanging with an easy slack that spoke of trust rather than control. At the end of it, Rex padded forward with quiet confidence, his ears flicking at distant sounds, his gaze alert but not restless. He was not just a pet. He moved with purpose, as though every step had meaning, every pause a calculation. Danielle's posture was relaxed, but there was a precision to it that did not come from comfort alone. Her shoulders stayed level, her chin neither raised nor lowered, her eyes drifting across windows, parked cars, and corners with a rhythm too deliberate to be casual. Anyone watching might have assumed she was simply taking in the pleasant evening, enjoying the calm after a long day. They would have been wrong. The faint hum of a lawnmower carried from somewhere down the block, blending with the distant laughter of children riding bikes in looping circles near a cul-de-sac. A sprinkler ticked rhythmically against a patch of green lawn, sending arcs of water glittering in the sunlight. It was the kind of scene designed to feel safe, predictable, untouched. Danielle exhaled slowly, letting the air settle deep in her chest. For a moment, she allowed herself to exist in that simplicity, the steady pull of Rex's leash grounding her in the present. Yet even here, even in a place that prided itself on order, she could feel it, the subtle shift in atmosphere that most people missed. A curtain that stilled too suddenly. A car engine idling just a second longer than necessary. The weight of attention that did not announce itself, but lingered. Rex sensed it before most would. His gait slowed by half a step, not enough to alarm, just enough to signal awareness. His head tilted slightly, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. Danielle did not look down at him, did not tighten her grip. She did not need to. They were already in sync. She adjusted her path slightly, angling toward the wider side of the street where the sunlight stretched unobstructed. Her face remained composed, unreadable, but her eyes sharpened by a fraction, catching reflections in passing windows, noting movement without acknowledging it. To anyone else, she was just another figure passing through a quiet neighborhood. To those who knew what to look for, she was something else entirely, a presence that did not drift but assessed, that did not wander but chose. And somewhere, just beyond the edges of that calm, something had begun to notice her too. The low rumble of an engine rolled into the quiet street, subtle at first, then unmistakable as it drew closer. Danielle did not turn her head immediately, but the reflection in a nearby SUV window told her everything she needed to know. A black and white cruiser eased around the corner, its movement slow, deliberate, like it had all the time in the world to decide what it wanted. Rex's ears angled back for a fraction of a second before returning forward, his body maintaining that same controlled pace, though the tension beneath his fur was now undeniable. The cruiser crept alongside the curb, matching Danielle's stride with unsettling precision. The driver's window slid down halfway, and a voice cut through the stillness, sharp and intrusive. "Hey, you." Danielle stopped. Not abruptly, not defensively, just enough to acknowledge that she had heard. She turned with measured ease, her expression neutral, her posture unchanged. Inside the vehicle, Officer Ryan Cole leaned slightly toward the open window, his elbow resting casually on the frame. His gaze swept over her, slow and unapologetic, lingering just a second too long as if cataloging every detail. In the passenger seat, Officer Mark Henson watched more intently, his jaw tight, fingers tapping against his thigh in a restless rhythm. "Afternoon, officers," Danielle said, her tone even, controlled, carrying neither warmth nor resistance. Cole's lips curled into something that almost resembled a smile, though there was no friendliness behind it. "Afternoon," he echoed, dragging the word out as if testing it. His eyes flicked down to Rex, then back up to Danielle. "Mind telling me what you're doing out here?" The question hung in the air, unnecessary and loaded. Danielle let a beat pass before answering. "Walking my dog." Henson let out a quiet scoff, shifting in his seat before pushing the door open with more force than needed. The car gave a slight rock as he stepped out, boots hitting the pavement with a heavy, deliberate thud. He adjusted his belt, his stance widening as he positioned himself just a few feet away, close enough to intrude, far enough to claim distance. "Funny," Henson muttered, his eyes narrowing as he circled slightly to Danielle's side. "Don't think I've seen you around here before." Danielle did not follow his movement. She kept her gaze on Cole, forcing him to remain the center of the exchange. "I live nearby," she replied. Cole tilted his head, as if considering the statement, though the skepticism in his expression never wavered. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Where exactly is nearby?" Rex shifted his weight, not stepping forward, but adjusting just enough that his body angled between Danielle and Henson. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible, but it did not go unnoticed. Henson's eyes dropped to the dog, his expression tightening. "That dog yours?" he asked, his tone sharpening. "Yes." "You got him under control?" The question came with an edge now, a challenge disguised as concern. Danielle's grip on the leash remained loose. "He is under control." Henson took another step closer, testing boundaries, his boots scraping lightly against the pavement. "Doesn't look like it," he said, his voice rising just enough to carry. "Looks tense to me." Cole pushed the car door open and stepped out as well, closing it with a firm click that echoed down the quiet street. Now both officers stood outside, flanking the space, their presence pressing in from both sides. Cole adjusted his vest, his posture straightening as he approached, his tone losing even the pretense of casual conversation. "We've had reports of suspicious individuals in this area," he said, his eyes fixed on Danielle. "People who don't belong." The words were chosen carefully, but the meaning was not hidden. Danielle held his gaze, unblinking. "And what exactly about me seems suspicious?" For a brief moment, neither officer answered. The silence stretched, thick with implication. Then Henson let out a dry, humorless breath, shaking his head as if the answer was obvious. "Let's not play games," he said. "We're just trying to figure out why you're here." Rex's stance tightened again, his chest rising slightly as he drew in a slow breath, his attention locked on the shifting tension around him. Danielle felt it. The way the situation was beginning to tilt, the way control was slipping from polite conversation into something else entirely. And still, she did not move. Not yet. The stillness stretched just a moment too long, and then it snapped. Officer Henson took another step forward, closing the gap until he stood nearly shoulder to shoulder with Danielle, his presence deliberate, invasive. "You didn't answer the question," he said, his voice tightening, each word pressed out with growing impatience. Danielle did not shift her stance. She did not step back. Her eyes remained steady, her expression composed in a way that seemed to frustrate him more than any argument could have. "I did," she replied calmly. "I told you I live nearby, and I'm walking my dog." Henson's jaw flexed, a faint twitch near his temple betraying the irritation building beneath his forced authority. He glanced at Cole, who gave a subtle nod, the kind that carried silent permission. That was all Henson needed. "Let me see some ID," Henson said, extending his hand, palm up, as if the outcome had already been decided. Danielle's gaze flickered briefly to his hand, then back to his face. "Is there a reason you need my identification?" she asked, her tone still even, not confrontational, but firm enough to draw a line. Cole exhaled sharply through his nose, stepping in closer now, tightening the space around her. "We already told you," he said, his voice dropping into something colder, less patient. "Suspicious activity. You fit the description." Danielle held his gaze without blinking. "What description?" For a fraction of a second, Cole hesitated, just enough to reveal that there was no real answer waiting behind his words. His expression hardened immediately after, covering the gap with irritation. "Don't get smart," he snapped. "Just show the ID." Rex shifted again this time more visibly. His body angled further forward, placing himself squarely between Danielle and Henson, his muscles tightening beneath his coat. He did not bark, did not lunge, but the quiet intensity in his stance carried its own warning. Henson noticed. His posture stiffened, his hand drifting instinctively toward his belt. "You need to keep that dog in check," he said, his voice rising, sharp enough to cut through the quiet street. Danielle's grip on the leash remained unchanged. "He is in check," she said. Henson let out a short, irritated breath, stepping even closer, testing the boundary with open disregard. "Doesn't look like it from where I'm standing," he muttered. "Looks like he's about 1 second away from becoming a problem." The words hung heavy, not just a statement, but a setup. Danielle saw it for what it was. She had seen this pattern before, the slow tightening of pressure, the attempt to provoke, to create justification where none existed. Her shoulders remained level, her breathing steady, but there was a subtle shift now, something quieter, sharper, settling behind her eyes. "Officer," she said, her voice controlled, each word placed with precision, "there is no threat here." Cole stepped in closer, his boots scuffing lightly against the pavement as he moved to stand directly in front of her, forcing her attention onto him. "That's not for you to decide," he said, his tone carrying a thin edge of hostility now, stripped of any pretense. "We decide what's a threat." Behind him, Henson adjusted his stance again, his movements restless, agitated, as if the lack of compliance was beginning to itch under his skin. "Last chance," Henson added, his voice louder now, meant to dominate the space. "Show us some ID, or this gets a whole lot more complicated." Danielle did not reach for her pocket. She did not move at all. The leash remained loose in her hand, Rex steady at her side, both of them holding the line without a single wasted motion. And in that moment, the balance tipped just a little further, the situation inching away from control and towards something neither officer fully understood yet, but were already too committed to stop. The silence did not break with a shout or a sudden move, but with something far more dangerous, a slow erosion of restraint. Officer Henson took one more step forward, close enough now, that the space between him and Rex disappeared entirely. "I said control your dog," he snapped, his voice louder, sharper, designed to provoke. Rex did not bark. He did not lunge. He simply held his ground, his body aligned in front of Danielle, his gaze locked, unwavering. Danielle's voice came steady, low, and deliberate. "He is controlled. You are the one escalating this." That was enough. The words landed in a way Henson did not like, stripping away the illusion of authority he had been building. His face tightened, a flicker of irritation turning into something more volatile. "You don't tell me what I'm doing," he shot back, his hand now fully settling on his belt, fingers brushing dangerously close to his weapon. Cole stepped in closer as well, his presence pressing forward, his tone colder, more forceful. "This is going sideways because you're not cooperating," he said. "Last time, show us your ID." Danielle did not move. The leash remained loose. Her posture remained unchanged, but her eyes sharpened, not with fear, not with panic, but with a clarity that made the air between them feel thinner. "I have done nothing wrong," she said, each word measured. "And you know it." Henson let out a harsh breath, shaking his head as if he had reached the end of his patience. "That's it," he muttered, his voice dropping into something final. "Step back. Now." He took a half step forward as he said it, forcing the command into action before it was even acknowledged. Rex responded instantly, not aggressively, but decisively. His stance tightened, his weight shifting forward just enough to block the movement, a silent barrier between Danielle and the advancing officer. No growl, No sudden motion, just presence, firm and unyielding. That single adjustment was all Henson needed. His entire posture snapped rigid, his shoulders squaring, his breathing turning sharp and uneven. "There it is," he barked, louder now, his voice echoing down the quiet street. "Aggressive dog." Cole's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing as he stepped to the side, creating space, positioning himself with practiced instinct. "Back up," Cole ordered, his tone no longer conversational, now edged with command. "Back up, or we will handle it." Danielle's grip did not tighten. She did not pull Rex back. Her voice remained steady, almost quiet in contrast to the rising volume around her. "He has not moved toward you. You are the one closing distance." Henson's patience snapped completely. "I said back up," he shouted, his hand now gripping his weapon, not yet drawn, but no longer resting. The movement was fast, reflexive, and it changed everything. Rex's ears flicked, his muscles coiling slightly, not in attack, but in readiness, in protection. Danielle saw it all unfold in a single, stretched moment. The shift from control to chaos hovering on a razor's edge. Her voice cut through it, calm, precise. "Do not do this." But Henson was no longer listening. The situation had become something else in his mind, something he needed to dominate, to win. "Control your dog, or I will," he snapped, his voice thick with threat, his stance widening as his grip tightened. Cole moved in sync beside him, reinforcing the escalation, his presence amplifying the pressure. The quiet street, once still and orderly, now held something volatile, something ready to break. And Danielle stood at the center of it, unmoving, unshaken, watching two men push past the point where reason could bring them back. For a fraction of a second, everything held in a fragile balance, like glass stretched too thin under pressure. Danielle's words still lingered in the air, calm and deliberate, but they no longer reached him. Officer Henson's grip tightened, his breathing uneven, his focus locked, not on reason, but on control slipping through his fingers. "I warned you," he said, his voice low, strained, as if convincing himself more than anyone else. Rex did not move forward. He did not bark. He stood exactly where he had been, a steady line of protection, his body language firm but contained. Danielle's voice came again, sharper this time, cutting through the tension. "He has not threatened you. Lower your weapon." But the command came too late. The sound split the quiet street in a single, violent crack. It echoed off the houses, bounced through the trees, shattered the illusion of safety that had settled there moments before. Rex's body jerked, the tension in him collapsing in an instant as he dropped to the pavement. The leash slipped slightly through Danielle's fingers, not from panic, but from the sudden absence of resistance at the other end. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating, as if the entire street had been forced to hold its breath. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower cut out. A child's laughter stopped mid-sound. The world seemed to hesitate. Henson stood frozen, his arms still extended, the reality of what he had just done catching up to him in slow, uneven waves. Cole's head snapped toward him, eyes wide for the briefest moment before hardening again, trying to contain the situation, to frame it, to justify it. "You saw that," Henson said quickly, his voice rising, defensive now, searching for ground that no longer existed. "The dog was aggressive. It was coming at me." But the words fell flat against the reality of the still form on the pavement. Danielle did not react the way they expected. She did not scream. She did not rush forward blindly. Instead, she lowered herself slowly, deliberately, her movements controlled, almost ritualistic. She knelt beside Rex, one hand resting gently against him, her touch steady, grounding. For a moment, her head lowered slightly, her shoulders still, her breathing measured. And then she stood. When she rose, something had changed. Not in her posture, not in any obvious movement, but in the air around her, in the way her presence seemed to settle into something colder, more precise. Her eyes lifted to meet Henson's, and whatever he saw there made his stance falter, just slightly. It It was not grief alone. It was not anger in the way he understood it. It was something quieter, something far more controlled. "You made a choice," Danielle said, her voice low, each word landing with exact weight. Cole stepped forward quickly, trying to regain control of the narrative, his tone sharp. "Ma'am, you need to stay right where you are. Do not escalate this." Danielle did not even glance at him. Her focus remained locked on Henson, unwavering. "You had time to step back," she continued. "You had time to listen." Henson swallowed, his grip loosening slightly now, the certainty draining from his posture. He was a threat, he repeated, but the conviction was gone, replaced by something brittle. Danielle's gaze did not waver. "No," she said quietly. "You were." The words hung between them, final, undeniable. And in that moment, the shift completed. The power they believed they held no longer felt as solid as it had just seconds before. Because Danielle Carter was no longer just a woman walking her dog. And whatever came next, they were no longer in control of it. The street no longer felt like a neighborhood. It felt like a scene paused mid-collapse, every sound dulled, every movement restrained by the weight of what had just happened. Officer Henson lowered his arms slowly, but not out of remorse, not fully. It was hesitation, uncertainty creeping in where arrogance had once been solid. Officer Cole stepped forward quickly, reclaiming the space, his voice cutting through the silence with forced authority. "All right, that's enough," he said, sharp and controlled, as if volume alone could restore order. "Ma'am, you need to place your hands where I can see them. Right now." Danielle did not move. She stood beside Rex, her posture straight, her gaze steady, as if the command had never been given. Cole's jaw tightened. He reached for his radio, but stopped halfway, choosing instead to double down. "Do not make this worse than it already is," he continued, his tone lowering, turning more dangerous. "You're being detained pending investigation. Turn around." Henson found his footing again in that moment, latching onto the script, the procedure that had always protected him before. He holstered his weapon with a stiff motion and stepped in closer, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal caught the fading sunlight as he held them up, not yet closing them, but making the intention clear. "You heard him," Henson said, his voice rough, trying to sound steady. "Turn around. Now." Danielle's eyes shifted, not to the cuffs, not to Cole, but back to Henson. For the first time, there was something else in her expression. Not anger, not grief. Calculation. "You still have time," she said quietly. The words were not loud, but they carried, cutting clean through the tension. Henson frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his face before irritation replaced it. "Time for what?" he scoffed. Danielle took a single step forward, not aggressive, not retreating, just enough to close the distance on her terms. Her voice remained level, but there was a weight behind it now, something that did not belong to an ordinary conversation. "To step back," she said. "To walk away from this before it becomes something you cannot fix." Cole let out a sharp breath, shaking his head, the corner of his mouth lifting in a dismissive smirk. "You think this is going to scare us?" he said, his tone dripping with disbelief. "You think throwing around vague warnings is going to change anything?" Danielle did not blink. "I'm not warning you for my sake." The statement landed heavier than anything she had said before. Henson's grip on the cuffs tightened, the faint clink of metal breaking the silence. He took another step forward, invading her space again, trying to reassert control through proximity. "Enough," he snapped. "Turn around, or I'll turn you around." Danielle's gaze held his, unshaken, unwavering. "The moment you put those cuffs on me," she said, her voice steady, precise, "you're going to wish you had listened." Cole barked out a short laugh, shaking his head as he stepped closer, reinforcing the pressure. "Yeah," he said mockingly. "And what, exactly, is supposed to happen?" Danielle reached slowly into her pocket, her movement deliberate, unhurried. Both officers tensed instantly, their attention snapping to her hand. But she did not pull out a weapon. She pulled out her phone. The screen lit up in her palm, casting a faint glow against her steady fingers. She looked at it for a brief moment, then back at them. "This is your last chance," she said. Henson let out a dry, dismissive laugh, the sound brittle and forced. "You're not calling anyone," he said, stepping forward again, closing the gap completely. "You're done talking." And with that, he reached for her wrist, the cold certainty of the cuffs already waiting in his other hand, unaware that in that single motion he had just erased his final chance to walk away. Henson's hand closed around Danielle's wrist, firm, forceful, the cold edge of the cuffs already angling toward her other arm. But the moment contact was made, something shifted in a way neither officer could explain. Danielle did not resist in the way they expected. She did not pull away, did not struggle. Instead, her body moved with a precise, controlled efficiency that felt less like reaction and more like execution. In a single, fluid motion, she rotated her wrist just enough to break his grip, stepping slightly to the side as his balance faltered forward. It was not aggressive. It was exact. Henson stumbled half a step, his control slipping, his confidence cracking in real time. Cole's eyes widened, his hand instinctively moving toward his own weapon. But he hesitated, something in the speed and precision of what he had just witnessed stopping him cold. Danielle did not advance. She did not attack. She simply repositioned, placing space between herself and both men, her stance grounded, centered, unshakable. Her phone remained in her hand. She tapped the screen once, calmly, as if completing a routine task. Then she lifted her gaze to meet theirs. "You should have listened," she said. The tone had changed completely. There was no longer any trace of negotiation in it. No uncertainty. No restraint offered for their benefit. Henson straightened slowly, his breathing uneven now, his eyes locked on her with something new, something that had not been there before. Not anger, not authority. Fear, creeping in at the edges, subtle but undeniable. What was that?" he asked, his voice no longer steady, the words catching slightly as they left his mouth. Danielle did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached into the inner seam of her jacket and withdrew a small, worn leather case. She flipped it open with a practice motion and held it up just long enough for both men to see. The insignia was unmistakable. The identification was not something they could dismiss, not something they could laugh off. It carried weight, history, authority of a different kind entirely. "Delta Force," she said quietly. The words did not need emphasis. They landed on their own. Cole's face drained of color, his posture shifting as if the ground beneath him had suddenly become unstable. His hand, still hovering near his weapon, dropped slowly, uncertainly, as the reality settled in. Henson blinked. Once, twice, his mind struggling to catch up, to reconcile the woman they had just tried to cuff with the identity now placed directly in front of him. "That's not," he started, but the sentence collapsed before it could form. Because it was, and they both knew it. Danielle closed the case and slipped it back into her jacket, her movements as controlled as everything else about her. "You escalated a situation you did not understand," she continued, her voice even, unwavering. "You ignored clear warnings. You used force where none was justified." Each statement landed like a measured strike, not emotional, but factual, undeniable. In the distance, a new sound began to rise, low at first, then building. Engines. Multiple. Fast. Cole turned his head instinctively toward the end of the street, his eyes narrowing as he tried to process what he was hearing. Henson followed, his breath catching as the sound grew louder, closer, unmistakable. Danielle did not look. She already knew. "Now," she said, her gaze fixed on them, her voice carrying a final, chilling certainty. "You are going to understand exactly what that means." And for the first time since they had stepped out of that cruiser, neither officer spoke. Because whatever they had believed about control, about authority, about who held power in that moment, was gone. Completely. Irreversibly. And something far bigger was arriving to take its place. The sound grew from a distant hum into a thunder that swallowed the street whole. Black SUVs turned the corner in tight formation, tires gripping the pavement with controlled urgency, engines cutting through the quiet like a declaration. They did not slow casually, They arrived with purpose. Doors opened in unison before the vehicles had fully settled, and men stepped out with a precision that carried authority far beyond badges and patrol routes. Their presence changed the atmosphere instantly, replacing tension with something heavier, something absolute. Cole's breath caught as he took a step back, his eyes darting between the approaching figures and Danielle, as if searching for some version of reality where this was not happening. Henson did not move at first. His body seemed locked in place, his hands still loosely holding the cuffs that now felt useless, almost absurd. What is this?" Cole muttered, his voice barely above a whisper, the certainty gone, replaced by something hollow. The answer came without urgency, without raised voices. A man at the front, dressed in tactical gear with a calm, controlled demeanor, approached with steady steps. His gaze moved past the officers briefly, acknowledging Danielle with a subtle nod before returning to them. "Step away," he said, his tone even, leaving no room for interpretation. It was not a request. Henson hesitated, just for a second, instinct fighting with fear, but the weight of the situation pressed down too heavily. He stepped back, the cuffs lowering slowly at his side. Cole followed, his posture shrinking, his earlier authority dissolving into something uncertain, exposed. In a matter of seconds, they were no longer the ones controlling the space. They were being positioned, contained, observed. One of the operatives moved forward, his hands firm but not aggressive as he reached for Henson's wrists. The same wrists that had moments ago held power now turned outward, guided behind his back. The click of restraints closing carried a different meaning this time. Henson flinched slightly, his jaw tightening, his eyes widening as the reality settled in fully. "You can't do this," he said, but the words lacked strength, lacked belief. Cole's turn came next. He did not resist. He barely seemed to register the movement as his arms were guided back, his shoulders stiff, his gaze fixed somewhere distant, as if trying to escape the moment unfolding around him. The street that had once been their stage was no longer theirs. Neighbors had begun to emerge at doorways, drawn by the commotion, their eyes wide, their whispers low but unmistakable. The same space where Cole and Henson had stood with confidence now held them in full view, stripped of that illusion, exposed under the quiet judgment of those watching. Danielle remained where she was, her posture unchanged, her presence steady. She did not step forward, did not interfere. She did not need to. Justice was no longer something she had to demand. It was already in motion. The lead operative turned slightly toward her, his voice lowering with respect. "Ma'am, the situation is under control." Danielle gave a small nod, her gaze drifting briefly to Rex before returning to the scene. "It should have been," she replied quietly. Behind her, the officers were guided toward one of the vehicles, their movements no longer their own, their voices reduced to fragments, to attempts at explanation that no one was interested in hearing. Their authority had not just been challenged. It had been dismantled, piece by piece, in front of witnesses, in front of a force they could neither intimidate nor control. And as the vehicle doors closed around them, sealing them inside, the message was unmistakable. The roles had reversed completely, and there was no going back. The SUV doors shut with a heavy finality, sealing Officer Cole and Officer Henson inside a reality they could no longer control. The engines started again, not with urgency this time, but with quiet authority, and one by one, the vehicles began to pull away, leaving behind a street that felt changed, as if something deeply unsettled had just been corrected. The onlookers who had gathered at a distance lingered for a moment longer, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and quiet understanding, before slowly retreating back into their homes, the whispers fading with them. The late afternoon light returned to its gentle rhythm, stretching across the pavement, brushing against the stillness that had finally begun to settle again. Danielle Carter remained where she stood, her posture unchanged, her presence steady even as the noise and movement receded. The lead operative approached her once more, his demeanor respectful, measured. "If you need anything further, ma'am, it will be handled," he said. Danielle gave a small nod, her gaze drifting briefly toward the spot where Rex lay. The weight of the moment rested there, quiet and undeniable, but she did not allow it to consume her. She had known loss before. She had carried it, learned from it, endured it. What mattered now was that it had not been ignored, not been dismissed, not been allowed to stand without consequence. "It already has been," she replied softly. The operative inclined his head, understanding the meaning behind her words without needing them explained, then stepped back, giving her the space she did not have to ask for. Danielle moved forward slowly, her steps measured as she approached Rex once more. She knelt beside him, her hand resting gently against his side, her expression composed, but softened by something deeper, something personal that no rank or training could ever erase. The street was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now, not empty, not indifferent, but aware. After a moment, she rose, her shoulders straight, her breath steady. There was no dramatic gesture, no outward display, just a quiet acknowledgement of what had been and what had been set right. She reached down, gathering the leash in her hand, holding it not as a symbol of absence, but as a reminder of loyalty, of trust, of something that had never needed to be proven. A soft breeze moved through the trees, carrying with it the faint rustle of leaves, the distant return of everyday sounds. Life continuing as it always does once justice has been restored. Danielle turned, her gaze sweeping the street one last time, not searching, not wary, but certain. The imbalance had been corrected. The line had been drawn and held. And without another word, she walked forward, her steps as steady as they had been at the beginning, her presence blending once again into the quiet order of the neighborhood. But now, that order carried something new, something earned. Respect, and the unspoken understanding that some lines, once crossed, are never without consequence.